One was executed by lethal injection, then had his brain removed. One hung himself in prison. One was executed with a single gunshot. One was killed by a drive-by shooting, and one used a concealed blade to end his life in his prison cell. Let's take a look at how these 5 serial killers met their end. We'll start off with Israel Keyes, an American serial killer, bank robber, burglar, arsonist, kidnapper and sex offender. He was convicted of 3 murders, but it's widely believed he killed at least 11 and committed dozens of other crimes across the United States from the late 1990s to February 2012. He was a cruel, calculated killer and travelled to several different locations and targeted random people who happened to cross his path. He would wait in parks, cemeteries, or anywhere that was quiet, so no one could witness his crimes. Despite the randomness of who he picked, his killing trips involved careful planning. He buried his murder equipment that included guns, ammunition, and chemicals for the destruction of bodies, and when he felt the urge to kill, he would dig it up and travel miles to select a victim, even flying outside of America to Canada, Mexico, and Belize. On his trips, he always disabled his cell phone and paid in cash, so tracking him down was difficult. He funded his trips through bank robberies. Keyes was finally caught after he murdered 18-year-old Samantha Koenig after he kidnapped her from a small coffee shop in Anchorage, Alaska, on February 1st, 2012. He sexually assaulted her and killed her the following day, leaving her body in a shed at his house, whilst he went on a 2-week cruise with his family. When he returned, he removed her body from the shed, applied makeup to the corpse's face, sewed her eyes open with fishing line, and took a photo of her next to a 4-day-old issue of the Anchorage Daily News, posing to appear that she was still alive. After demanding $30,000 in ransom from her family, some of which was paid into Koenig's bank account, Keyes dismembered her body and disposed of it in Matasuka Lake north of Anchorage. Then, in an uncharacteristic mistake, he started using Samantha's bank card to withdraw funds from her bank accounts at ATM from different states around America. He always disguised himself, but was actually caught after a security camera recorded his rental car in Arizona, and he was apprehended. Keyes was arrested and eventually brought back to Alaska, where he confessed to the crime. Whilst in custody, he shared details of other crimes he'd committed, and eventually he was connected to 3 murders. Whilst waiting for trial in Anchorage Correctional Center, 34-year-old Keyes managed to conceal a razor blade, even though he was under strict security, and on December 2nd, he cut his wrists and attempted to strangle himself. A suicide note was found under his body titled "An Ode to Murder," but offered no clues about other possible victims. In 2020, the FBI released the drawings of 11 skulls and 1 pentagram, which had been drawn in blood and found underneath Keyes' bed after his suicide. One of the drawings included the phrase "We are one" written at the bottom. The FBI believes the number of skulls correlates with the total number of his victims. A chilling end to a very sadistic killer. Pedro is a little different to the others on this list, but is still a man who claimed to have killed over 100 drug dealers, rapists and murderers. Filho never considered himself a serial killer, as he targeted criminals who he believed deserved to die for their crimes. He considered himself as more of a vigilante than a serial killer. Filho killed his first victim at the age of 14, in revenge for the man sacking his father. After shooting a security guard at the same time, he fled his hometown of Minas Gerais, Brazil, to Mogi da Cruzes in Sao Paulo. There his killing spree continued, although he only targeted known criminals, making him a celebrity in the news media as the vigilante known as Lil PT Killer. In Sao Paulo, he met a girl and they started living together. She soon fell pregnant, but she was murdered by a rival gang leader After her murder, Filho went on a revenge killing spree and tracked down and killed every member of the gang. Soon after, he found out that his father was in prison for murdering and dismembering his mother with a machete. He unexpectedly visited his father in prison and killed him by stabbing him 22 times. After the murder, he supposedly carved his heart out and bit a piece of it. On the 24th of May 1973, at still only 18 years old, he was imprisoned for the first time and was sentenced to 126 years, but was released in 2007 despite killing 47 inmates whilst incarcerated. In 2011, he was jailed again for 8 years, but was released for good behaviour on the 10th of December 2018 after 7 years. Following his release, he announced he had retired from vigilantism and committed not to commit any more crimes. In a surprising move, he became a YouTuber with a channel called Pedro X Matador. On this channel, he commented on modern crimes, campaigned against gang violence, and taught the public not to take pride in criminal acts. However, I guess you cannot kill that many people and not make enemies. At around 10 AM on the 5th of March 2023, Rodrigues was shot and killed by 2 men firing from a car in Mogi das Cruz, who then fled in another vehicle. To date, no suspects have been arrested. Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo was a Ukrainian-born Soviet serial killer nicknamed the Butcher of Rostov, the Rostov Ripper, and the Red Ripper, who assaulted, murdered, and mutilated at least 52 women and children between 1978 and 1990 in the Russian SFSR, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Uzbek SSR. Chikatilo, a married father of 2 and former teacher, committed his first murder in September 1978 when he killed a 9-year-old girl. He went on to murder at least 52 other children and adults. In most cases, he tried to gouge out his victims' eyes. He would lure his victims with promises of money or sweets if the victims were children. It took many years for all the murders to be linked to one killer, and many opportunities were missed to apprehend Chikatilo. At one stage, due to the savage nature in which Chikatilo killed his victims, police thought the killings had been conducted by either a group harvesting organs to sell for transplant or the work of a satanic cult. However, because several of the victims' bodies had been discovered at railway stations on one rail route through the Rostov Oblast, in 1990, investigators saturated these areas, hoping to catch the killer. On the 6th of November, Chikatilo killed and mutilated a 22-year-old woman in Woodland near Don Leshkov's station. After killing her, he returned to the railway platform and was noticed by an undercover officer who observed him washing his hands and face, and noticed grass and mud on his coat. He looked suspicious, so the officer checked his papers, but had no reason to arrest him. It was only after the body was found a few days later that he was linked to the murders. Chikatilo was finally arrested on the 20th of November after he had been under surveillance for 6 days. A few days later, he confessed to 56 murders, and even led police to the bodies of some of his undiscovered victims. He was brought to trial in Rostov on the 14th of April 1992, charged with 53 counts of murder, in addition to 5 charges of sexual assault against minors, committed when he had been a teacher. In court, Chikatilo stood in an iron cage, specifically constructed in a corner of the courtroom, to protect him from attack by the enraged and hysterical relatives of his victims. On the 15th of October, he was sentenced to death plus 86 years, after being found guilty of 52 murders and 5 counts of sexual assault. On hearing his fate, Chikatilo kicked his bench across his cage and began shouting abuse. On the 14th of February 1994, Chikatilo was taken from his death row cell to a soundproofed room in Novokresk prison and executed with a single gunshot behind the right ear. He was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison cemetery. John Wayne Gacy was an American serial killer and sex offender who raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys in Northwood Park Township near Chicago, Illinois. Known as the Killer Clown due to his public performances as a clown prior to the discovery of his crimes, Gacy remains one of the most talked about serial killers of all time. We have mentioned him many times over the years. Gacy, who on the outside was a helpful, respectable member of the public, lured all his known victims to his house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in an unincorporated Norwood Park Township in Illinois. Typically, he would lure a victim to his home and dupe them into donning handcuffs on the pretext of demonstrating a magic trick, before torturing and killing his victim by either asphyxiation or strangulation with a garrote. He murdered his first victim in 1972 and had murdered twice more by the end of 1975. After his divorce from his second wife, he murdered at least 30 more victims. The investigation into the disappearance of Des Plaines teenager Robert Piest led to Gacy's arrest on December 21, 1978. After being informed that the police had found human remains in his crawl space and that he would now face murder charges, Gacy told officers he wanted to clear the air. In the early morning hours of December 22nd, in the presence of his lawyers, Gacy confessed to murdering approximately 30 young males, all of whom he claimed had entered his house willingly. He was found guilty of 33 charges of murder. He was also found guilty of sexual assault and taking indecent liberties with a child. At the time, his conviction was the most for which any person in US history had been convicted. He was sentenced to death for each murder committed, and his execution was set for June 2, 1980. He would spend 14 years on death row. Isolated in his prison cell, he began to paint. His paintings have since been displayed at exhibitions and sold at auction. On the morning of May 9, 1994, Gacy was transferred to Stateville Correctional Center to be executed. That afternoon, he was allowed a private picnic on the prison grounds with his family. For his last meal, he ordered a bucket of KFC, French fries, a dozen fried shrimp, fresh strawberries and a Diet Coke. That evening he received his last rites and was escorted to the Stateville execution chamber. At 12:40 a.m., the procedure to administer the lethal injection began, although the chemicals used in the execution solidified unexpectedly, clogging the IV tube. The tube had to be replaced before the execution could continue, and the entire procedure took 18 minutes. His final statement to his lawyer before his execution was that killing him would not compensate for the loss of others, and that the state was murdering him. His final spoken words were reported to be, "Kiss my ass." Gacy's death was confirmed at 12:58 a.m. on May 10, 1994. His brain was removed along with slices of other organs, preserved in a Ziploc bag for further examination and study, and believed to still be in the basement of Dr. Helen Morrison, a forensic psychiatrist, writer and profiler. The rest of Gacy was cremated, and the whereabouts of his ashes remain undisclosed. From an early age, Frederick West from Gloucestershire, England, was known to the police for various petty crimes and sex offences. However, he later progressed to murder, and after meeting his second wife, Rose, things escalated quickly. For a 20-year period between 1967 and 1987, Fred murdered at least 12 young women, including his first wife and his own daughter, Heather. The majority of the murders were with his second wife, Rose, although Fred killed at least 2 women before he met her. After a slew of murders, the bodies were dismembered and buried in fields, backyards, or when the couple moved to Cromwell Street in Gloucester, in the garden or under the cellar. Rose is known to have murdered Fred's stepdaughter. Suspicion fell on Fred and Rose after one of their daughters, 13-year-old Louise, told her friend that her dad had sexually assaulted her on more than one occasion. The friend's mother called the police. However, the case against Fred dropped after his children, including Louise, declined to testify in court. Although police were concerned about the couple's daughter, Heather, who they discovered had been missing since 1987, as well as Fred's first wife, Rena, and his stepdaughter, Charmaine. On the 23rd of Feb 1994, police arrived at 25 Cromwell Street, and the shocking truth was revealed, after Fred admitted to killing Heather and burying her under the patio. In total, 9 bodies were found buried in various places at Cromwell Street. Fred's stepdaughter was found at the couple's old home in Midland Road, and 2 more bodies were discovered in letterbox and finger post fields at Kempley, on the Gloucestershire border with Herefordshire. Both Fred and Rose were arrested on the 25th of February 1994. Fred later confessed to murdering up to 30 people, indicating there are still 18 other undiscovered victims. During questioning, Fred was very matter-of-fact about the killings, and his attitude shocked investigators. A psychologist put this down to the fact Fred had killed and tortured so many people over the years. He was desensitized to his crimes. It was like an addiction to him. Fred was charged with 12 murders and Rose with 9. Whilst on remand at HM Prison Birmingham on the 1st of January 1995, Fred's initial strict suicide watch had been relaxed, and in his cell, Fred made a ligature out of a blanket and tags he had stolen from prison laundry bags. He put the improvised rope around his neck, attaching it to a door handle and a window catch. He then sank to his knees and hung himself. He left a suicide note with a drawing of a gravestone at the bottom. It read, "In loving memory, Fred West, Rose West. Rest in peace where no shadow falls. In perfect peace he waits for Rose, his wife." Rose faced court alone and was eventually found guilty of 10 murders. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, and currently resides in HM Prison Newhall in West Yorkshire. Despite never being convicted, Fred West is considered one of the most depraved serial killers the UK has ever seen. Our hearts go out to all the victims who were affected by the cases we've talked about in this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.